Hey guys, tonight we drift into the smoky air of 19th century London, where the streets hum with horse-drawn carriages, the Thames stinks faintly of sewage, and the skyline is punctuated not by skyscrapers, but by church spires and the looming chimneys of industry. You feel your boots strike the cobbles as you walk through a city in motion, restless and growing, its heart beating faster with every puff of steam from the locomotives rolling into new stations. The city is awake, and you, for better or worse, are right in the middle of it. You probably won't survive the air quality alone, but let's not be dramatic this early. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight, and what time it is on your clock compared to the deep toll of London's bells. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The fog clings to your coat, cold and damp, carrying with it a mix of soot, river mist, and the lingering smell of coal fires that never quite leave the city. Children dart between horses, their laughter mingling with the cries of street vendors selling roasted chestnuts, ribbons, and newsprint. Somewhere in the distance a church bell tolls, but it feels small and tired compared to what is about to rise in this city, because London right now is preparing for something immense, something that will become the very heartbeat of Britain itself. It's 1830s London, a place of ambition. The Industrial Revolution churns, and with it comes both progress and chaos. You can almost taste the iron in the air, hear the clang of hammers from workshops along the Thames. The city is bursting at its seams, expanding faster than anyone can control, but looming over everything is a parliament that feels both ancient and unsteady, its medieval shell creaking with time. Few in these streets could guess that soon a fire would erase the old order and clear the way for a tower so iconic that even people who have never set foot in London would one day recognize it instantly. The thing about Londoners in this moment is that they are used to change, though not all of it is welcome. Railways tear through neighborhoods, smog turns daylight into a murky twilight, and cholera stalks the water supply. And yet through this mess, London thrives. It's a paradox, ugly and beautiful, terrifying and exhilarating. You find yourself brushing soot from your sleeve and imagining what sort of monument might rise from such contradictions. Historians still argue whether it was necessity or sheer vanity that birthed the project we're about to follow. You turn onto Bridge Street, just outside the Houses of Parliament. The medieval complex sits brooding along the Thames, its Gothic turrets, dark and weather-beaten, its chambers echoing with debates that will soon fall silent in fire. It's easy to forget that these buildings had stood for centuries, surviving kings, queens, and wars, but they were not immortal. Even now the walls are brittle, patched with repairs, whispering the fatigue of age. The irony is that no one yet imagines they are on the cusp of disaster. Londoners walk by without a second thought. A clerk rushes through the gate with a bundle of papers, unaware that within just a few years, all this stone and wood will be reduced to ashes. But that's the nature of history. People live the ordinary right up until the extraordinary collides with them. One curious detail you might notice as you stroll closer is how unimpressive the clock on the old Parliament seems. It's functional, yes, but hardly memorable. If you were to ask a passerby about the great timekeeping of Westminster, they'd probably shrug. And yet, within a generation, the sound of a clock will define the entire city. London will measure its heartbeat by the strike of a bell that doesn't yet exist. A reminder that sometimes the biggest symbols of a place aren't born from careful planning. They stumble into existence through accidents, failures, and the occasional cracked piece of metal. The streets hum with possibility, though you'd have to squint hard to see it. Imagine the contrast, a dirty city choked with fog, dreaming of a shining Gothic tower. It sounds absurd, doesn't it? Like building a marble palace in the middle of a coal yard. And yet that's exactly what's about to happen. The desire wasn't just for beauty, it was about showing the world that Britain, loud, sprawling, and increasingly powerful, could create something magnificent. Something that said, we're still here, still in charge, and, oh, by the way, we figured out how to make the biggest, most accurate clock in the world. You step aside as a wagon trundles past, loaded with iron beams, destined for some new bridge. The driver curses at his horse, and you catch a whiff of tar and smoke. You wonder if he knows that one day iron will play its part in holding up a tower that will become one of the most photographed structures on Earth. Probably not. To him, iron is just weight, labor, and maybe back pain waiting to happen. That's the funny thing about history. The grand arcs of progress are built from tiny, unnoticed actions like this. As you make your way toward the river, the damp chill seeps into your bones. The Thames rolls dark and sluggish, reflecting the lantern glow of nearby streets. Across the water, warehouses loom, their windows glinting faintly. The air tastes metallic. You stop for a moment, listening to the hum of the city. And in that hum, you can almost hear the faint ticking of time speeding toward a catastrophe that will wipe away the old and demand something new. You glance back at the Parliament buildings one last time. Their silhouette cuts against the fog, jagged and weary. Soon flames will consume them, and in that destruction, the idea of Big Ben will take root. Not that anyone calls it Big Ben yet. Right now, it's just a city waiting for its destiny to chime. The night of October 16th, 1834 begins innocently enough, with clerks still scratching quills across parchment, debates echoing faintly through chambers, and the Thames lapping lazily outside the Palace of Westminster. You can almost feel the calm, the ordinary rhythm of government life. But inside, a few men are hauling out stacks of tally sticks, those ancient wooden records that once served as tax receipts. They're outdated now, relics of medieval bookkeeping, and someone has decided that tonight is as good a night as any to burn them in the furnaces beneath the House of Lords. You crouch in the cellar with them, the air already thick with the smell of wood smoke. The sticks crackle as they burn, splintering with sharp little pops like 1,000 tiny fireworks in a space not meant for such heat. The fire roars too eagerly, licking up the chimney flues. You might step back at this point, sensing the growing heat. The clerks, though, shrug. What's the worst that could happen? Well, as it turns out, the worst does happen. Within hours, the flames burst from the furnaces, crawl up the ducts, and ignite the very bones of the building above. You stumble outside into the October night, where an orange glow spills into the fog, turning it into a shifting, fiery halo. Crowds gather along the riverbanks, mouths open, as centuries of history are swallowed by fire. The flames roar so high they reflect in the dark water of the Thames, making it look as if the river itself burns. The fire spreads mercilessly, devouring oak beams and panelling that had stood since the Middle Ages. Paintings curl into ash, tapestries shrivel, and the chambers of power are reduced to cinders. You clutch your coat tighter against the heat and try to imagine the shock of Londoners who had always assumed these buildings were permanent, eternal. Historians still argue whether it was simple negligence or sheer bad luck that let the blaze. grow so fast, but everyone agrees it was the most devastating fire London had seen since the Great Fire of 1666. From across the river, you watch the skyline transform. Spires collapse into embers, masonry cracks under the heat, and the crowd gasps as roofs cave in with thunderous crashes. The spectacle is horrifying, yet mesmerizing. Charles Dickens himself would later describe the fire as one of the most impressive sights ever seen, though you can't help but think impressive is doing a lot of work there. As dawn creeps in, the fire finally subsides, leaving behind only blackened shells of walls and smoking ruins. The air smells of char, acrid and bitter, clinging to your hair and clothes. Soldiers keep the crowds back as officials stumble through what's left, their faces pale, eyes wide. The old palace is gone, reduced to rubble and soot. And while the shock is immense, a whisper begins to rise in the ashes. What comes next? For Britain, the loss is more than architectural, it's symbolic. Parliament is the heart of government, and without its chambers, the nation seems momentarily adrift. Yet there's also opportunity in disaster. You can almost hear ambitious architects sharpening their pencils, ready to sketch out visions of a new, grander palace that will proclaim Britain's power to the world. It's funny how humans turn even the most disastrous fires into excuses for reinvention. You linger near Westminster Hall, the one survivor of the blaze. Its vast hammer-beam roof stands defiant, a relic of medieval craftsmanship too stubborn to burn. Londoners file through in silence, some with tears in their eyes. The hall feels like a ghost, surrounded by smouldering rubble. You press your hand to the ancient stone, cool and damp from the fog, and sense how close it came to destruction. Not everyone mourns equally, of course. In the streets, vendors are already hawking cheap sketches of the fire, and pamphlets circulate, blaming this party or that minister. One cheeky cartoonist even draws the tally sticks themselves laughing in the flames, as if revenge against bureaucracy had finally been served. Even in disaster, London's sense of humour refuses to die, but the government cannot laugh for long. They need a plan, and quickly. Temporary chambers are set up, makeshift spaces where laws continue to be debated under tarpaulin roofs. You squeeze inside one of these damp, cramped halls and feel the awkwardness of it all. The mighty British Empire reduced to squabbling in, something that feels more like a leaky barn. There's no way this will do. A statement must be made in stone and iron, something worthy of Britain's pride. You hear murmurs spreading. A competition will be held, architects invited to submit designs for a new palace of Westminster. Suddenly the loss begins to look like an opportunity to redefine Britain's identity. The ashes have barely cooled, and already imaginations are running wild. What kind of palace will rise from this? Should it be modern and classical or rooted in tradition? Should it mirror Rome's grandeur or England's medieval spirit? One fact is certain. Whatever rises here must surpass the old. It must awe Londoners and visitors alike, and remind every foreign envoy that Britain is not a nation to underestimate. Out of fire, an idea begins to take shape, an idea that will eventually grow into the tower whose clock and bells will become the voice of London itself. For now, though you step back from the ruins, the smell of smoke still in your nose, the stones still warm beneath your hands, London has lost its seat of power, but it has also gained an empty canvas, and soon someone will start to draw on it. The morning after the fire, London seems to hold its breath. Parliament has been reduced to ruins, yet already the city buzzes with the energy of reinvention. You drift through coffee houses where men in waistcoats argue heatedly about what the new buildings should look like. Some insist on neoclassical grandeur, with columns and domes to rival ancient Rome. Others argue for something more authentically English, a style that nods to the nation's medieval past. As spoons clink against teacups, you can hear the sound of pride wrapped in architectural debate. Historians still argue whether this insistence on Gothic revival was nostalgia or a deliberate political message, but at the time it was a line in the sand. Britain's Parliament would not mimic Greece or Rome. It would root itself in its own past. The competition is announced in 1835, and suddenly every architect with ambition and a sharpened pencil rushes forward. You watch as scrolls of paper unfurl across drafting tables, quills scratching late into the night by candlelight. Some designs are fantastical, others gaudy, and many utterly impractical. One entry looks like a hybrid between a cathedral and a fortress, while another resembles a gigantic wedding cake. The rules are strict. The style must be either Gothic or Elizabethan, and the design must accommodate the functional needs of government, which, let's be honest, is like asking someone to design a suit of armor that doubles as pajamas. Enter Charles Barry, a man with a calm demeanor and a love of order. You find him hunched over his desk, sketches piling up around him, candle, wax dripping dangerously close to the edge of his plans. Barry isn't an obvious Gothic man. His heart leans more to classical symmetry, but he's clever. He partners with Augustus Pugin, a young, fiery designer whose Gothic sensibilities are almost religious in intensity. Pugin lives and breathes pointed arches, traceried windows, and ornate stonework. Where Barry thinks in structure, Pugin dreams in detail. Together, they create a design that threads the needle, a Gothic revival masterpiece with the orderliness Barry craves and the flourish Pugin demands. You trail them into a smoky committee room as their design is unrolled before the judging panel. Imagine the hush, a vast riverfront facade peppered with turrets, spires, and intricate Gothic tracery. The design is majestic without being absurd, imposing without being cartoonish. It whispers of England's medieval heritage, but on a scale that declares, "This is the empire's beating heart." The judges are impressed. Out of nearly 100 submissions, Barry's design rises to the top. Pugin, in truth, is more responsible for the Gothic detailing, though his name will be overshadowed by Barry's for years to come. You might catch a flicker of bitterness in his eyes, but he buries it beneath his passion for the work. After all, this is a chance to redefine British identity through stone and mortar. As construction begins, you walk the banks of the Thames and imagine the transformation. Piles of stone are offloaded from barges, cranes creak as they lift materials skyward, and masons chip away at blocks destined for new towers. The old ruins are slowly cleared, making way for foundations that will anchor one of the largest government complexes in the world. It's noisy, chaotic, and yet strangely rhythmic. The city itself pulsing with progress. Still whispers circle through London about whether this massive project is folly. Some worry the cost will spiral out of control. Others question whether such an ornate design is practical for the work of government. You overhear one elderly gentleman mutter that Parliament doesn't need all those pointy bits. But most Londoners, secretly or openly, are thrilled. The silhouette rising over the river will be theirs, something they can point to with pride, even if they grumble about taxes in the meantime. Barry spends endless hours tweaking layouts, ensuring the Lords and Commons get their proper chambers, making room for libraries, committee rooms, and all the labyrinthine spaces necessary for government. Pugin adds flourishes, gilded ceilings, rich wood carvings, stained glass windows that catch the grey London light in bursts of colour. The two men bicker, of course, Barry wanting restraint, Pugin demanding authenticity, but their tension produces brilliance. You slip into Barry's study one late evening, where he sits, slumped in a chair, quill discarded, muttering about logistics. On the desk nearby, Pugin has sketched another elaborate Gothic doorway, his lines flowing with feverish energy. One practical, one visionary. The unlikely duo is building more than a palace. They're laying the foundation for a symbol that will define London's identity for centuries. The design includes a clock tower, though at this stage it feels like just another element, a vertical accent to balance the long river facade. No one quite realizes yet that this tower will one day eclipse everything else, becoming the very voice of London. You glance at Barry's notes, where the clock tower is simply marked as Tower 4, clock and bell. It's understated, almost casual, as though it's a footnote in the grand design. And yet, that tower will soon carry the weight of time itself. Outside, Londoners crowd the embankments, craning their necks as scaffolding begins to creep upward. Children point, vendors sell roasted chestnuts to onlookers, and gossip spreads.
Like wildfire, what will this palace look like when it's done?
The answer is still years away, but the dream has already taken root. You brush soot from your sleeve and turn back toward the river, the new palace slowly emerging from the ashes of the old. For now, it is still just stone, timber, and ambition. But within its bones lies the future voice of Britain, a clock and a bell not yet born, waiting to claim their place in history. By the early 1840s, the skeleton of the new Palace of Westminster begins to rise, and with it, the outlines of the great clock tower. You find yourself standing on Parliament Square, boots sinking slightly into the churned mud, where carts and workers move constantly, hauling stone, iron, and timber. The air is filled with the clang of hammers, the rasp of saws, and the shouted orders of foremen who seem to believe that louder voices equal faster work. Londoners gather behind wooden barriers to gawk at the scaffolding, their eyes tracing the timber frames that climb skyward, the future silhouette of a tower meant to rival Europe's finest landmarks. The foundation work alone is staggering. Engineers dig deep into the clay by the Thames, pouring thousands of cubic feet of concrete to ensure the weight of the tower, over 13 tons of iron, stone, and bell yet to come, will not sink into the riverbank. You step carefully around the trench, peering down into the half-flooded hole where men work knee-deep in water, their lanterns flickering against damp brick walls. The stench of the river mingles with wet stone and sweat, a reminder that monumental beauty is often born in unpleasant places. Charles Barry paces the site with his rolled plans tucked under one arm, occasionally stopping to squint at the rising tower. Augustus Pugin, ever the Gothic zealot, points out details, waving his hands furiously as he insists on pointed arches here, tracery there, and buttresses that look as if they've leapt straight from a medieval cathedral. Their arguments, often heard above the din, become a kind of background music to the building site. Historians still argue whether Barry actually respected Pugin's input or merely tolerated him as a necessary nuisance. But what is clear is that the tower's character bears Pugin's fingerprints. As the tower climbs higher, you crane your neck with the crowd. At first, it's nothing more than layers of stone and timber scaffolding, but slowly the shape emerges, a square base, buttressed corners, and vertical lines stretching upward with an almost stubborn ambition. It feels impossible, this structure climbing out of London's fog, yet every week it rises higher. One boy in the crowd jokes that soon the tower will poke the heavens, and his mother hushes him, though she smiles all the same. The city, of course, has mixed feelings. Some admire the project, whispering about how it will show the world Britain's greatness. Others grumble about the cost, muttering into their pints that Parliament spends more on stone than on people. You overhear one old sailor scoff, "A clock that tall? What for? So the pigeons can be punctual." Yet even skeptics find themselves glancing up, when the scaffolding grows another story taller. By now, the tower is already being nicknamed St. Stephen's Tower, though the public hasn't fully warmed to it. It's an appendage to the new palace, still years away from the moment when its bell will define it. For now, its identity is bound to the sweat of the labourers. Walk among them in the evenings, their faces lit by small fires, hands blistered from chiselling stone all day. They share bread, beer, and bawdy jokes, unaware that their anonymous toil is giving London its most famous landmark. A quirky tidbit emerges around this time, a rumour that ghosts of the old palace wander the scaffolding at night, muttering Latin, prayers and rattling unseen chains. One worker swears he saw a hooded monk perched on the half-built parapet. Whether true or just the product of tired eyes and too much gin, the stories spread quickly, adding a layer of Gothic spookiness to
An already Gothic project.
Londoners, never ones to resist a good ghost tale, pass the rumour along eagerly. You step back to take in the skyline. Already the tower dominates its surroundings, dwarfing nearby rooftops. The Thames reflects the rising structure, its waters rippling with the glow of lanterns that dot the worksite. Smoke drifts from barges bringing stone from quarries, adding to the permanent haze over the river. In this moment, you can sense it. London is being remade, and the tower is more than an architectural feature. It is a statement. The tower takes years to rise. By 1852, its full height of 316 feet looms against the grey London sky. The scaffolding is finally stripped away, revealing ornate Gothic detailing, pinnacles, tracery, and 4 massive clock faces waiting to be installed. You tilt your head back until your neck aches, realizing that this is no mere accent to the palace. This is a monument in its own right, already casting its shadow across the city. Yet for all its grandeur, it is incomplete without its heart, the clockwork and the bell. The tower may dominate the skyline, but without the tick of time and the boom of sound, it is still silent stone. You sense London's impatience growing. The city that runs on timetables, train schedules, and punctuality demands more than just pretty architecture. It wants a timekeeper, a voice that can be trusted. And soon, very soon, the impossible challenge of building the world's largest clock will begin. For now, you linger with the crowd below the tower. Children toss pebbles into the Thames, vendors call out their wares, and above you, the Gothic crown of the tower seems to scrape the clouds. It's difficult to imagine that all this ambition began with a pile of tally sticks burning too hot. Out of fire and rubble a tower has risen, but it is still waiting for its heartbeat. The tower now looms over the Thames, its stonework finished, its Gothic pinnacles stabbing upward like frozen lightning. But what good is a clock tower without a clock? You stand beneath its shadow as murmurs ripple through the crowd. How will anyone design a mechanism so vast, so precise, that it can keep time on 4 colossal faces, each nearly 23 feet across? The question hangs heavy in the damp London air, and you can almost hear the collective doubt, like trying to build a pocket watch the size of a house. Inside drafty workshops, engineers and clockmakers wrestle with the impossible. The government announces a competition for the design of the great mechanism, and suddenly the city hums with gossip about gears and pendulums, escapements and accuracy. To most people, these words might as well be alchemy. You lean over the shoulder of a clerk recording submissions, watching as proposals pile up, each one promising to solve the riddle of timekeeping on such a scale. The name that rises above. The noise is Edmund Beckett Denison, a barrister with a sharp tongue and a sharper mind for mechanics. Denison is not your typical clockmaker. He's more of a gentleman tinkerer, equal parts brilliance and arrogance. You follow him into his workshop, where he fiddles with brass gears, muttering about gravity escapements and tolerances. He insists his design will be accurate within 1 second per day, something unheard of for a clock of this magnitude. Historians still argue whether Denison was a genius innovator or an insufferable meddler who stole credit from professional craftsmen, but his mark on Big Ben's heart is undeniable. The challenge is immense. The pendulum alone will measure over 13 feet, swinging steadily every 2 seconds. It must resist the tug of wind on the giant hands, the expansion of metal in summer heat, and the contraction in winter cold. You watch as Denison sketches a solution, the double three-legged gravity escapement. In simple terms, it allows the pendulum to swing freely, unaffected by external forces, while still driving the hands of the clock. A marvel of Victorian ingenuity, born from equal parts necessity and stubborn pride. Meanwhile, Edward John Dent, a renowned clockmaker, is brought in to actually construct the mechanism. You hear his tools clink in the workshop, the rhythmic tap of files smoothing brass edges. Dent's patience balances Denison's arrogance, though the two men clash more than once. Imagine two chefs fighting over the same recipe, each convinced the soup would be inedible without their secret ingredient, and yet through their bickering, the mechanism begins to take shape. By 1854, the clock is ready for testing. You step into the workshop and see the enormous gears gleaming under lamplight, the pendulum ticking with hypnotic precision. The sound is steady, reassuring, like the heartbeat of something alive. The crowd that gathers for demonstrations is
mesmerized. A reporter notes that if the tower were ever to fall, the clock would likely continue ticking stubbornly in the rubble.
That's Victorian confidence for you. Of course, delays plague the project. The clock mechanism is finished years before the tower is truly ready to receive it. It sits idle, like a thoroughbred pawing the ground while its stable is still under. Construction. Londoners grow impatient, muttering that Parliament can debate endlessly but cannot tell the time. You smirk at the irony. The greatest timekeeper in the world is itself running late. A quirky tidbit circulates among the public that when the clock is finally installed, its accuracy will be fine-tuned by placing pennies on the pendulum. Add a penny, the swing speeds up ever so slightly. Remove one, it slows. You picture dignified gentlemen in top hats carefully stacking pennies as though playing the world's most delicate coin game. And yet, it works. To this day, a handful of pennies keeps Big Ben punctual. When at last the tower is prepared, the process of installing the clock begins. You join a crowd watching massive crates hauled up the narrow staircases, ropes straining, pulleys creaking. Piece by piece, the mechanism is hoisted into its new home high above the city. Engineers wipe sweat from their brows, craftsmen shout instructions, and Denison, never modest, stands with arms folded as if daring the universe to doubt his brilliance. You climb the winding staircase to see the work up close. The chamber is cramped, the air thick with dust and oil. The giant gears interlock smoothly, gleaming brass against iron. Above, the 4 clock faces wait, empty for now, their frames like blind eyes gazing out over London. Soon, they will be filled with opal glass, backlit at night to glow against the fog. Standing there, you feel a strange thrill. The tower is no longer just stone. It is becoming a living thing, a creature of iron and rhythm, poised to announce every passing hour to a city that thrives on both industry and routine. The impossible challenge has been met, at least on paper. Now all that remains is to give the tower its voice, and for that, London will need a bell. The clock may be the brain of the tower, but it is the bell that gives it a voice. Without a bell, the grand clock tower would be like an orator with no lungs, a singer who opens their mouth and produces only silence. And so, the great task of casting a bell of unprecedented size begins, a bell that must be heard across the fog-thick streets of London, through the corridors of Parliament, and even, some said, on the distant banks of the Thames. You follow the excitement down to Whitechapel, where furnaces roar and the glow of molten metal flickers against the brick walls. The smell of hot iron and soot thickens the air. London has never seen a bell this large attempted, and the challenge is whispered with awe. It must weigh over 13 tons. That's heavier than 3 elephants, all packed into a single resonant body of bronze. The first attempt is entrusted to the Warner Brothers of Stockton-on-Tees. Their foundry prepares for months, building moulds larger than some cottages, digging pits deep enough to hold the monster. Workers stripped to their shirts in the heat, hauling charcoal, shoveling sand, and ladling molten metal into crucibles. You can almost taste the metallic tang as the glowing stream of liquid bronze pours down into the mould, hissing and spitting like a dragon caged in clay. When the bell cools and emerges, it is immense, a gleaming titan christened with anticipation. Crowds gather to witness its transport to the tower, marvelling at the sheer size. Horses strain against their harnesses as the great bell trundles slowly through the streets, Londoners craning their necks from windows to see history on wheels. For a moment, it seems the impossible has been achieved, and then disaster. The bell is hung, struck, and within weeks a hairline crack snakes across its side. Each toll produces a sour, buzzing note, like a singer with a damaged throat. The bell is silenced, an embarrassment that Parliament cannot hide. Jokes ripple through the taverns. The grand clock tower may tell the time, but its bell can only groan like an old drunkard. The broken giant is carted away, and the honour of casting its replacement falls to the Whitechapel Bell Foundry, a name steeped in centuries of experience. Here, under the guidance of master founder George Mears, a second attempt begins. The foundry's furnaces roar again, and the workers, faces blackened with soot, work in punishing heat, their movements as choreographed as a dance. You lean over the pit and watch as the molten bronze cascades into the mould, filling it with the promise of redemption. This time, the result is astonishing. The second bell is heavier still, 13.5 tons, measuring over 7 feet. Tall. It takes days simply to cool, days more to release from its mould. When finally unveiled, it gleams like something from legend. Mears declares with quiet pride that this bell will endure. And endure it does. Getting the bell into the tower proves an epic feat of logistics. You join the crowd, lining the streets,
as it is loaded onto a sturdy carriage hauled by teams of horses moving no faster than a man's walking pace. The journey is so slow that Londoners joke the bell might arrive in the next century, but arrive it does, inch by inch, until it
rests at the base of the tower. Then begins the most perilous stage, hauling it up the narrow shaft. It takes 30 men working day and night for over a week. Ropes creak, pulleys strain, voices bark orders. You climb alongside them, sweating in the dark staircase. The bell, swaying like a suspended sun, threatening at every moment to smash through the wooden beams. The men chant to keep rhythm, hauling hand over hand, their muscles trembling with the effort. Finally, the bell is in place, hung in its chamber high above the city. The day of the first strike is one of hushed anticipation. Londoners press against the railings of Westminster Bridge, ears poised. You stand among them, breath held, as the hammer swings. The note that bursts forth is deep, sonorous, and majestic. It rolls across the river like thunder, rattling windows and echoing through alleyways. Some clasp their hands in awe, others grin with relief. London has its voice at last. But the bell still needs a name. Officially, it is called the Great Bell of Westminster. Yet among the workers and citizens another name sticks, Big Ben. Some say it honours Sir Benjamin Hall, the imposing Commissioner of Works, whose booming speeches were as hard to ignore as the bell itself. Others whisper it comes from a popular heavyweight boxer of the era, Benjamin Count, known for throwing punches as resounding as a 12-ton toll. Whatever its origin, the nickname spreads faster than smoke, and soon no one calls it anything else. Standing beneath the tower that day, you feel the vibrations in your chest, the ground trembling faintly beneath your boots. The clock has its mechanism, the tower its face, and now at last it has its mighty voice. Every strike is a declaration. London's heartbeat has begun, steady and unyielding. With the bell in place, the tower is complete in structure, but its true purpose, keeping the most accurate time in the land, has yet to be tested. The enormous clock must not only look grand, it must function with a precision that few had believed possible. London, after all, is a city of fog, soot, and soot-clogged air, where the grime of coal and gas lamps could corrode even the best crafted machines. Yet here, high above the streets, the gears are expected to tick with the accuracy of a celestial instrument. You climb once more up the narrow staircases, spiraling into the chamber of the great clock itself. Before you, housed in a vast iron frame, rests the heart of the mechanism. It is not delicate, not dainty, but muscular and industrial. Polished brass wheels mesh with steel pinions, turning with slow inevitability. The great pendulum swings, a rod of steel 15 feet long, carrying a bob of nearly 300 kilograms. It moves with measured grace, one swing every 2 seconds, steady as breath, the whole tower keeping time with its rhythm. It was the genius of Edmund Beckett Denison, later Lord Grimthorpe, who devised the refinements that gave this clock its unique accuracy. He introduced the double three-legged gravity escapement, a mouthful of a term that translates into a simple marvel. No matter what forces tug on the hands of the clock, wind battering the great minute arm, rain freezing on its edge, the pendulum remains untouched, free to swing in perfect isolation. Denison's invention would go on to be copied in other great clocks, but here it found its first and most famous home. Still, even perfection requires tinkering. You watch as engineers experiment with a method almost comical in its simplicity. To adjust the rate of the pendulum, they place coins, literal pennies, on top of its bob. Each penny alters the clock's speed by a fraction of a second per day. It is said that to this day, the accuracy of Big Ben is governed by the humblest of currency, tiny discs of copper resting upon a giant's shoulders. As the weeks pass, the clock's reliability astonishes. In a time when ordinary household clocks could drift by minutes in a single day, this tower loses barely a second. Newspapers proclaim its accuracy with pride, and citizens set their pocket watches by its toll. On mist-wreathed mornings, bargemen on the Thames glance toward the great dial, its golden hands glinting through the haze, adjusting their routines to its authority. London itself begins to beat in time with the tower. You linger in the clock room during the first great trial, the synchronization of all 4 dials. Each is over 20 feet across, each hand a feat of engineering. The minute hands, stretching 14 feet, weigh over 100 kilograms, yet must be moved with exacting precision. From within, the rods and gears engage, turning all four faces at once. You lean against the iron framework and feel the faint tremor as the hands move forward in perfect unison. Outside, Londoners gaze upward, four faces shining against the sky, no longer just decoration, but the very proclamation of the hour. On the day the clock begins its public duty, you stand once more among the crowds by Westminster Bridge. The river smells of wet stone and coal smoke, gulls circle lazily, and everywhere there is a sense of expectancy. The bell tolls, the dials gleam, and people begin resetting their lives. A shopkeeper pulls out a watch from his waistcoat and nods with satisfaction as he winds it. A barge captain calls to his crew to cast off precisely on the stroke. A mother tugs her children away, declaring that school is beginning, and there is no excuse for tardiness now that Big Ben is watching. The Dwi Tower does more than regulate time. It begins to regulate London itself. Trains depart on its hours, courts convene at its strokes, and Parliament rises and falls according to its solemn note. The great clock becomes not merely a machine, but an arbiter of civic order, a constant reminder that in a world of uncertainty, there is at least one measure of stability. As you linger at twilight, the fog thickening and the gas lamps sputtering into life, you watch the four clock faces glow faintly against the darkening sky. The pendulum swings, the gears turn, the hands crawl forward. The city below stirs to its rhythm, unaware of the countless adjustments, labours and inventions that make it possible. London has been given not just a clock, but a pulse. The clock now governs the city, but the tower is more than machinery and stone. It is also a monument of symbolism. By the mid-19th century, Britain stood at the height of its empire. Its ships touched every shore, its merchants filled every harbour, its rule extended across continents. Yet for the citizens at home, it was not distant colonies or global fleets that marked their daily lives, but the chime of the hour in Westminster. The tower stood as proof that Britain could master not only oceans, but time itself. The Victorians, with their fondness for order and discipline, embraced the tower as their own. Punctuality became a virtue, lateness a vice. The familiar sound of Big Ben rolling across rooftops wove its way into literature, sermons and songs. Writers praised it as the most trustworthy voice in London. Charles Dickens himself remarked, "Upon the solemn tolling of the bell, as though the city's conscience was speaking from on high." You drift among the throngs that gather in Westminster's shadow on holidays and state occasions. Children point at the gleaming clock face, mothers hush them with pride, and visitors crane their necks as though in the presence of royalty. The tower, soaring more than 300 feet into the air, commands both awe and reassurance. In a city constantly shifting with smoke, fog, and expansion, here was permanence, unmoving, unblinking, eternal. Yet permanence is only an illusion. Already soot blackens the creamy limestone. Pigeons roost in the decorative crevices, their droppings
streaking the carved tracery.
On stormy days, the wind whistles through the iron frame of the belfry, and you feel the tower tremble ever so slightly, as though breathing with the city it watches. Time and weather, even politics, leave their subtle marks upon its body. In Parliament itself, debates rise and fall beneath its gaze. The chime of Big Ben punctuates fiery speeches, reminding those below that however heated their words, time marches steadily on. Ministers have been known to pause mid-argument, waiting for the bell to finish its sonorous count before resuming their rhetoric. The tower becomes, in its own way, a participant in governance, a metronome to the nation's democracy. Beyond politics, the tower filters into the rhythms of ordinary Londoners. You follow the lives of clerks and seamstresses, of apprentices and omnibus drivers, all of whom regulate their days by its chime. At the stroke of 9, office doors open. At noon, shopkeepers draw shutters to half close for luncheon. At 5, workers flood into the streets, guided by the toll that signals freedom from toil. The sound of the bell is a communal heartbeat, shared by millions. Even in times of crisis, the tower provides comfort. On fog-bound nights when the river is invisible and the lamps struggle to glow, the deep voice of Big Ben still carries across the city, assuring Londoners that order remains. When trains stall in the mist, passengers peer through windows, ears straining for the familiar toll that tells them the hour. In an age before electric signals and wireless timepieces, this great iron voice is the surest anchor to certainty. Standing on Westminster Bridge at dusk, you sense why the tower matters so deeply. The air is heavy with coal smoke, the lamps flicker gold against the gloom, and above it all the clock face glows like a pale moon, its minute hand inching forward with steady resolve. The river below catches the faint shimmer of light, rippling it into fragments as though time itself were breaking upon the current. It is here that Big Ben ceases to be just a clock. It becomes an emblem of stability, of governance, of unity. To hear it is to be reminded that one belongs to a city vast and teeming, yet ordered by a single rhythm. For the Victorians, so enamoured of progress yet fearful of chaos, there could be no finer reassurance, and so the tower rises not merely as an engineering feat, but as a cultural beacon. Each hour it tolls, each second it marks, is another thread, woven into the identity of London, a city that never fully sleeps, that struggles and argues and celebrates, all under the watchful eyes and resonant voice of the great clock. By the 1860s, the tower had already become a symbol etched into the mind of Londoners, but its life was not without strain. The great bell, Big Ben, suffered an early mishap soon after its installation. Only months into service, a crack spread through its iron body, leaving its original voice harsh and distorted. For a time, the tower stood in embarrassed silence, its great purpose undone by one fatal fracture. Yet the Victorians, ever practical, did not abandon it. The bell was rotated, its hammer lightened, and though the scar remained, it rang once more, its slightly imperfect tone becoming the very sound generations would come to cherish. You imagine the workers who tended to the wounded bell, men blackened with soot and sweat as they wrestled with chains and pulleys in the dim interior
of the belfry. Lanterns swung against iron beams as they inched the massive bell into place, each clang echoing through the hollow chamber like a heartbeat. When at last Big Ben's voice returned, Londoners cheered as if welcoming an old friend from illness.
What could have been a flaw transformed into character, binding the city even more closely to its tower? The years passed, and with them came the test of endurance. Industrial soot darkened the tower's creamy stone until its Gothic details were almost obscured beneath a layer of grime. Yet even blackened, it remained majestic, a silent guardian above the river. Beneath its gaze, the city expanded, railways roared in, factories multiplied, and neighbourhoods sprawled in every direction. The tower kept watch through it all, unchanging, unmoved, its glowing clock faces piercing through the smoke-laden air. On winter nights, the cold river mist would wrap the tower in a shroud. You picture the lanterns of boatmen gliding on the Thames, their faint lights trembling against the current, while overhead the muffled chime of Big Ben drifted down like a benediction. The city below might groan with poverty, crowding and unrest, but the voice of the tower assured them that time remained constant, steady, and impartial. It is not only ordinary days that the tower measured, but extraordinary ones too. During moments of national importance, royal weddings, jubilees, proclamations, the toll of the bell reached beyond celebration or mourning. It became the sound of Britain itself, carrying over rooftops and down alleys, echoing across the Thames, to touch both rich and poor alike. Standing beneath its weighty sound, people felt part of something larger than themselves, something enduring. But endurance requires care. Engineers and keepers worked tirelessly, climbing ladders and narrow staircases to oil gears, replace ropes and polish lenses. Their lives were lived in rhythm with the mechanism itself, each day a careful balance of inspection and repair. They knew the tower not as a distant symbol, but as a living machine with quirks and demands. In their diaries, some described the tower almost as a companion, moody in wet weather, stubborn in winter, faithful when tended properly. By now, the tower's influence stretched even beyond Britain. Travellers arriving by ship would hear its chimes across the river and know they had reached London, the heart of an empire. Writers spoke of it in foreign lands, painters sought to capture its silhouette, and tourists filled their sketchbooks with its likeness. It became a shorthand for the city itself, a single spire and clock face standing in for the whole teeming metropolis. One evening, you stand once more on Westminster Bridge, the lamps flickering against the thickening dusk. A steamer glides by, its whistle faint beneath the commanding voice of Big Ben marking the hour. The crowd around you pauses almost unconsciously. Conversations dip, footsteps slow, as though everyone instinctively bends their life around the toll. And then, as the last note fades, the bustle resumes. Time has spoken, and London obeys. So it was, by the late 19th century, that the tower's voice had grown inseparable from the rhythm of the nation. Each crack in its stone, each scar in its bell, each smear of soot on its Gothic curves told a story of resilience. Not flawless, not eternal, yet deeply human in its persistence. The Victorians could not imagine their city without it, and neither, perhaps, can you. As the 19th century drew toward its end, the tower settled into the rhythms of maturity, yet it was far from forgotten. Each day, the life of London flowed around it. Hansom cabs clattered over the bridge, market traders shouted in Covent Garden, factory whistles shrieked at dawn and dusk. Above it all, the steady beat of the clock commanded order, an invisible conductor guiding the city's immense orchestra. People set their watches by it, workers paced their shifts to it, and newspapers published its accuracy as though it were the nation's heartbeat. In the cramped alleys of Whitechapel or the crowded boarding houses of Southwark, families measured their evenings by the boom of Big Ben drifting faintly through the smoky night air. Even those who never laid eyes on the tower still felt its presence in the sound that threaded through every quarter of the city. It was both a comfort and a discipline, soothing in its constancy, stern in its reminder that time allowed no dawdling. Imagine, now the tower's custodians, lanterns in hand, ascending its narrow stairs late at night. Each step echoed against the stone, and the air grew colder as they climbed. At the summit, the great ironwork of the mechanism awaited them, humming with the precision of a giant heartbeat. The keepers adjusted gears, tightened bolts, wound the cables that held the great weights. The entire nation trusted these quiet figures, their labor unseen, their responsibility immense. One slip could throw the city's schedule into chaos, Yet they went about their duties with calm routine. When dawn returned, sunlight struck the gilded hands of the clock, flashing briefly over the Thames like a beacon. The city stirred awake. Trains rumbled across bridges, steam poured from chimneys, and bells rang in parish churches, yet none rivaled the authority of Big Ben's sonorous toll. The tower was not merely a keeper of time, it was a keeper of identity. To belong to London was to live within the range of its voice. Artists of the late Victorian age captured the tower in etchings and watercolours, often softened by fog or framed by bustling river traffic. Poets spoke of it with reverence, likening it to a steadfast guardian of the nation's soul. In parlours across the country, toy models and souvenirs appeared, miniature towers standing proudly on mantels. Already the tower had shifted from mere building to icon. Yet this reverence was not only sentiment, it was practical as well. Telegraph offices across Britain synchronized their systems to the strikes of Big Ben, ensuring that railways and commerce moved in harmony. Even the empire abroad looked to it. Distant colonies received word of London's time as a kind of tether to the motherland. In far-off barracks and colonial offices, officials would mark their clocks, faintly hearing, in imagination at least, the voice of the great bell. You find yourself picturing a sailor home from India, disembarking at the docks of the Thames after months at sea. As he trudges along the riverbank, the familiar sound of Big Ben greets him. In that moment, every weary mile, every foreign port dissolves into the reassurance that he is home. For many, that chime was not simply sound, it was belonging, a tether to memory and identity. Even as new inventions surged forward, electric lights, the telephone, the underground railway, the tower remained defiantly traditional. Gas lamps still glowed along its staircases, and gears still turned by hand-cranked winding. Its persistence in the age of change reassured Londoners that while the world transformed, some things would remain fixed. The tower had become a paradox, ancient yet modern, functional yet symbolic, mechanical yet almost spiritual. On certain nights, when fog smothered the city and muffled all other sound, the deep, resonant voice of the bell would roll out across the dark water like the toll of eternity itself. You can almost hear it now, echoing against unseen buildings, fading into silence, leaving the city hushed, as though London itself had paused to listen. By the final years of Queen Victoria's reign, the tower had matured into something more than a monument. It was memory, routine, symbol, and sentinel all at once. It was London's voice, steady and unflinching, the sound of a people who believed themselves destined to endure. And as you stand imagining that world, you sense that the tower was no longer just part of London. London was, in many ways, part of the tower. With the dawn of the 20th century, the tower entered an era of turbulence and trial. The industrial confidence of late Victorian London gave way to uncertainty as the empire faced the shifting currents of a new age. Yet through each upheaval, the steady rhythm of the clock carried on, a constant against the swirl of change. In 1906, electric lights were installed behind the great dials, their soft glow piercing through fog and drizzle. For the first time, the clock's face could shine in the darkness, serving not only as a keeper of time, but also as a beacon across the metropolis. Londoners walking home in the small hours would glance upward and see the faint halo of the illuminated dial, reassurance that the city's heart still beat, even as they drifted into sleep. The light became a quiet promise. While you rest, the tower watches. When the First World War thundered across Europe, the tower took on new meaning. Its chimes became a reassurance for those enduring blackouts, rationing, and loss. Families would gather around hearths, curtains drawn tight against enemy airships, and listen to Big Ben strike the hour. Each toll was a reminder that even as the world convulsed, London stood. Yet the tower itself did not escape the scars of war. In 1916, a bomb fell nearby, rattling its windows and shuddering through its foundations. Still the bell rang out, defiantly, its voice unbroken. By 1918, as victory was declared, crowds surged through the streets. Amid the chaos of cheering, whistles, and song, the sound of Big Ben cut through, measured, solemn, steady. Some wept at its toll, hearing in its notes not celebration alone, but remembrance of the countless who would never return. The tower was no longer simply a marvel of engineering, it had become a vessel of shared grief and resilience. The interwar years gave the tower a different role. It became a symbol in print and film, appearing in travel posters, postcards, and the new reels of cinema. For those abroad, seeing the tower instantly meant London, just as the Eiffel Tower meant Paris, or the Statue of Liberty meant New York. It was the shorthand of a city, a nation, an empire, etched into the world's imagination. As the 1930s closed and another war darkened the horizon, the tower prepared once more to endure. During the Second World War, its chimes were broadcast by the BBC, reaching soldiers in trenches, sailors on the seas, and families in far-flung corners of the globe. To hear Big Ben strike on the radio was to hear the voice of home. It was defiance, in sound reassurance that Britain endured. Churchill himself would listen for it, calling the chimes the sound of freedom. The tower did not escape the Blitz. Night after night, London burned, the skies lit by firestorms, the air filled with sirens. Bombs fell close enough to shatter glass, and incendiaries threatened the Palace of Westminster itself. Yet through the smoke, the clock kept its time, and the bell rang. To many Londoners huddled in shelters, the sound was not only a measure of the hours, but a shield against despair. The voice of Big Ben was the heartbeat of survival. When peace came in 1945, the tower's endurance became legend. The world saw in it not merely architecture, but the resilience of a people. Foreign soldiers posed for photographs before it, diplomats used it as a backdrop, and poets once again turned its chimes into metaphor. It was no longer just London's tower, it was humanity's symbol of steadfastness amid ruin. Imagine now the quiet evening of May 1945. The war is won, the city exhausted yet jubilant. Fires no longer rage in the skies, but rubble still clutters the streets. In that uneasy calm, the voice of Big Ben rolls out across the Thames once more. Each note carries both mourning and relief, weight and release. For the generation that had survived, the sound was not simply the marking of time, it was the proof that time itself had survived. And so, as the 20th century moved forward, the tower entered a new age, not only as a keeper of hours, but as a keeper of memory. Its chimes no longer belonged to one city alone. They had become part of the soundtrack of the world. The years after the Second World War reshaped both London and the tower that had stood watch over it. The city, scarred but unbroken, began the slow, deliberate work of rebuilding. Amid the cranes, scaffolds, and dust of renewal, the clock tower remained steady as ever, its great bell striking the hours as if to keep the rhythm of recovery. The 1950s brought fresh challenges. Londoners, adjusting to rationing's long tail and the austerity of post-war life, still looked to the tower as a symbol of endurance. Tourists, too, began to return, eager to see the familiar silhouette they had glimpsed in wartime newsreels. Travel guides wrote of the famous chimes of Big Ben, and for many, hearing them firsthand was proof they had truly arrived in London. In 1952, Britain received a reminder that even symbols were not immune to silence. That August, after nearly
90 years of service, the great bell cracked once again. For months, its voice was hushed, the strike mechanism resting idle. Londoners felt the absence like a missing heartbeat.
newspapers printed anxious updates, and debates arose in Parliament about how quickly the bell could be repaired. When, at last, Big Ben rang out again, people stopped in the streets to listen. The return of its voice was greeted not with cheers, but with a profound, quiet relief. The mid-century also marked the beginning of the tower's global fame as broadcast media expanded. With the growth of television, the tower became a fixture of New Year's celebrations. Millions tuned in, not just in Britain but around the world, waiting for the hands of the clock to strike midnight as Big Ben tolled the turning of the year. Its sound carried across oceans and through radio waves, bound listeners into a single shared moment of time. In 1976, however, another silence fell. A catastrophic mechanical failure halted the great clock, leaving the dials frozen. For more than 9 months, the tower stood mute, its once constant measure of time suddenly absent. Engineers laboured with extraordinary care, dismantling and repairing the intricate mechanism. Londoners joked about a city without time, but underneath, the humour was unease. When at last the clock was restored and the chimes rang out once again, the city seemed to exhale. The late 20th century saw the tower woven even more tightly into the fabric of national identity. It appeared in films, postcards, guidebooks, even postage stamps. When royalty marked jubilees or the nation hosted great events, the camera's gaze inevitably turned to the tower. And when times of difficulty arrived, economic struggles, political storms, social unrest, the tower remained a steadfast counterpoint. In 1980, conservationists began to worry about the toll of pollution and weather on the Victorian stone. Layers of soot and grime obscured its intricate Gothic detail, and cracks appeared in its facade. Restoration work was undertaken, wrapping the tower in scaffolding for long months. Londoners passing by felt a pang, seeing their familiar landmark, hidden behind wooden planks and tarpaulin. But when the coverings finally fell away, revealing the cleaned, renewed tower, it was as though an old friend had been given back to the city, shining once again. The 1990s ushered the tower into a new role as a global icon not only of London, but of Britain itself. With satellite television and the early internet, its image was beamed into living rooms across continents. News reports from Westminster often framed the tower in the background, its steady tick and toll providing a visual anchor for politics, pageantry, and protest alike. The name Big Ben now belonged not just to a bell, nor even to a city, but to the imagination of the world. As the century drew to a close, the tower bore witness to both joy and uncertainty. On New Year's Eve of 1999, the world's gaze turned to London as the millennium approached. Crowds gathered along the Thames, fireworks poised to erupt, and at the stroke of midnight, Big Ben rang in the year 2000. Its voice carried across a global broadcast audience of millions, the sound of history itself striding into a new age. For Londoners and for the world, the tower had become more than a keeper of hours. It was memory, tradition, identity, wrapped in stone, iron, and sound. And as the 20th century gave way to the 21st, its role as a witness to human history was only set to deepen. The dawn of the 21st century found the tower standing as firmly as it had in the Victorian age, though the world around it was changing at a speed its builders could scarcely have imagined. Airplanes now traced lines across the sky above. Smartphones buzzed in pockets below, and the city's skyline bristled with glass and steel towers that dwarfed much of old Westminster. Yet the familiar Gothic outline remained, as it always had, a reminder of continuity amid constant transformation. In September of 2001, the world shifted. The attacks on New York reverberated far beyond America's shores, and in Britain, the tolling of Big Ben became a solemn gesture of solidarity. On the Day of Remembrance, its chimes rang heavy in the air, broadcast across continents, uniting listeners in mourning. More than a clock or a landmark, it had become a voice that nations paused to hear. The early 2000s brought new tests closer to home. In July 2005, London endured the shock of coordinated bombings on its transport system. Once again, the tower stood in silent witness. In the aftermath, when Westminster reconvened, the strike of the Great Bell marked a return to order, its steady rhythm echoing the resilience of the city and its people. Meanwhile, the tower's fame grew in unexpected ways. As cinema and popular culture looked to symbols of Britain, Big Ben appeared again and again, sometimes faithfully, sometimes fantastically. It exploded in blockbusters, spun backward in time travel stories, and stood serenely in travel advertisements. School children in far-off countries could sketch its outline without ever setting foot in London. In this way, the tower became not just a national treasure, but a global shorthand for Britain itself. By 2012, the year of Queen Elizabeth II's Diamond Jubilee and the London Olympic Games, the tower was poised for yet another transformation. Parliament officially renamed it the Elizabeth Tower in honour of the monarch's 6 decades on the throne. For Londoners, the name felt both new and inevitable. Just as Victoria had once been woven into its stone, now Elizabeth was etched into its identity. Yet for most of the world, the beloved misnomer Big Ben endured, a testament to how deeply the bell's voice had eclipsed the finer points of nomenclature. During the Olympics that same year, the tower played its part in welcoming the world. On July 27th, for the first time since 1952, the Great Bell tolled outside its usual schedule, ringing 40 times in the morning to mark the opening of the Games. Londoners gathered on bridges and along the embankment, listening as the deep tones rolled over the Thames. The sound was both ancient and new, echoing across a city preparing to host the globe. Yet while the world celebrated, engineers knew the structure was aging. Centuries of weather, vibration, and the sheer strain of use had left their mark. Hairliney, cracks spread in stonework, the iron roof leaked, and the clock mechanism showed the fatigue of constant motion. Behind the scenes, plans for the most ambitious restoration in the tower's history were quietly set in motion. In August 2017, the news broke. Big Ben would fall silent for 4 long years. The announcement was met with dismay. Londoners and visitors alike were unsettled by the thought of the city without its heartbeat. For more than a century, its chimes had measured not just hours, but moments of national importance. Now conservation demanded quiet. On the final stroke before silence, crowds gathered in Parliament Square. Some cheered, some wiped away tears as the bell tolled noon. The last echo lingered, and then the air stilled. For the first time in living memory, Westminster was without its familiar voice. In the years that followed, the tower disappeared behind scaffolding. Its stone was scrubbed and repaired, its iron painted anew, its clock hands removed and restored. The sight of the great landmark swaddled in steel and canvas became a symbol in itself. a reminder that even the most enduring icons must sometimes pause, mend, and begin again. For tourists, it was a disappointment. For Londoners, an odd emptiness. And yet, beneath the coverings, the work continued with meticulous care, each piece restored to ensure that the tower could endure not just for decades, but for centuries more. As the restoration advanced, anticipation grew. The silence itself became part of the city's rhythm, an absence felt so keenly that people longed for its return. And when at last the great bell was scheduled to ring again, the event was marked on calendars across the nation. London, as ever, would measure its time by the sound of Big Ben. And in that return lay a promise that the voice which had carried through war, peace, joy, and grief would continue to guide generations yet to come. The long-awaited return came on New Year's Eve, 2021. As the final night of the year unfolded, crowds gathered along the Thames, their breath rising in clouds against the cold, their eyes turned toward the tower. For the first time in 4 years, the face of the clock was fully visible again, its hands gleaming with restored color, its gilded details shining as though new. The scaffolding that had once concealed it was gone, revealing a structure that looked both familiar and astonishingly fresh. As midnight approached, the anticipation swelled, cameras rolled, radio broadcasters fell quiet, and thousands of voices hushed in unison. And then, with an authority undiminished by silence, the great bell tolled. Its sound poured over the river, rolled across Westminster, and travelled through television speakers into living rooms across the globe. For Londoners who had grown up with its constant rhythm, the return felt like the restoration of a heartbeat. For those hearing it for the first time, it was an initiation into a tradition that bound past and present together. In the following months, the full scale of the restoration became evident. The Elizabeth Tower, once dulled by soot and weather, now gleamed in shades not seen since the 19th century. The clock faces had been repainted in their original Prussian blue, the ironwork gilded with fresh gold leaf. Each detail had been carefully chosen to reflect the tower as its Victorian builders had intended it. Londoners joked that Big Ben looked like it had been given a bath, but beneath the humour was a quiet pride. A landmark so familiar it had become almost invisible now, commanded fresh attention. The reopening also marked a new chapter in the way the tower connected with the public. In earlier centuries, its audience had been limited to those within earshot of its chimes, or able to see its silhouette above the city. In the 21st century, the sound of Big Ben could be streamed live online, its image captured in endless selfies, its presence shared instantly across social media. What had once been a local clock for Westminster was now a clock for the world. Yet even amid digital age transformations, the tower retained its aura of solemn tradition. In September 2022, that role was underscored with profound clarity. The death of Queen Elizabeth II plunged the nation into mourning, and once more the great bell became a voice of ritual. Its slow, measured toll accompanied her funeral procession, each strike sinking deep into the silence of the city. For generations who had lived their entire lives under her reign, the sound was both comfort and reminder. Time moves on, and monarchs, like mortals, pass. With the coronation of King Charles III in 2023, the tower once again framed a moment of national transition. As golden processions wound through the streets, the steady chimes measured their passage, just as they had for coronations.
Past.
The continuity was unmistakable. Though centuries had passed, though crowns had changed, the sound of Big Ben remained unchanged, as though time itself bowed to the bell. In quieter moments, the tower continued to fulfill its most basic duty, marking the hours of the day. Office workers looked up from their screens at the sound of its chimes. Tourists recorded videos as it struck noon. Londoners paused unconsciously when it echoed across the river. The steady toll did what it always had. It reminded people that time, relentless and impartial, continues its march. At night, when the city's noise settled into hums of traffic and distant voices, the clock faces glowed softly against the dark sky. Illuminated from within, they shone as beacons above Westminster, visible from bridges and embankments. For some, the sight was practical, reassurance that trains, meetings or last buses were still on schedule. For others, it was quietly poetic, a reminder that even in a restless city, there remained one constant, faithfully keeping watch. As the 2020s advance, the Elizabeth Tower stands not just as an artifact of Victorian ambition, but as a living participant in national life. Its voice continues to mark grief and joy, endings and beginnings. Its image remains woven into art, cinema, souvenirs, and dreams. For every tourist gazing upward, for every Londoner glancing across the river, for every listener catching its tone on the radio, Big Ben remains more than a bell. It is the sound of continuity itself. Soon another century will begin, and generations yet unborn will stand where crowds have always stood, listening as the great bell tolls midnight. They may not know every story of its past, but they will feel, as countless before them have felt, that rare sensation of being bound to something larger than themselves, a voice of iron, ringing through stone and time, calling all who hear it into the shared rhythm of history. And now, at the end of this long journey, the sound of Big Ben seems to settle into your thoughts the way it settles into the air above the Thames, deep, steady, unhurried. For more than a century and a half, it has been London's timekeeper, yet also something far greater. A witness, a companion, a reminder that life moves forward with or without our notice. When you think of its story, you see the layers of history it has carried. Born of Victorian engineering tempered by war, shrouded in silence during times of repair, and reborn in shining colour after years of restoration, it is not simply a bell or a tower, but a presence. Its voice is woven into the lives of millions, past and present, a sound that has measured weddings and funerals, dawns and midnights, parliaments and protests. Even now, in this quiet moment, you can almost hear it. Not as a loud strike shaking the stones of Westminster, but as a faint echo, a memory of a chime. It is slow, deliberate, measured. Each note seems to hang in the air a little longer than the last, as though urging you to let go of hurry, to step into its rhythm. Time itself seems to soften in its company. The rush of days, the weight of hours, the endless ticking of clocks, all of it eases when you think of that single, patient bell. It does not scold or demand. It simply reminds. A reminder that the hour has come and that another will follow, and another after that. There is comfort in such certainty. And as you drift further into this stillness, imagine the tower standing tall against the night sky, its faces glowing faintly, its stone hushed, its bell resting until the next hour. Around it, London hums and sighs, but within the circle of its sound, there is peace. Let its rhythm carry you now, the great clock keeping watch while you need not. The hands will turn without your effort. The bell will strike without your worry. Time will pass, as it always has, steady and sure, and you, like so many before you, can let go, can close your eyes, can rest, knowing that Big Ben will keep the hours for you until morning comes.